Suddenly, the black merchant appeared from behind, advising Jean Genu to give in. If he angered her, it would inevitably provoke Count Tori. These words immediately enraged Jean Genu. He unleashed a powerful attack, which only slightly eased his resentment, but he had to face reality. With his current strength, he couldn't challenge a count from the 11th floor. Reluctantly, he agreed to provide blood. Hearing this, the vampire Angela immediately pounced on him, overjoyed. In an instant, Jean Genu activated his parasitic form. Branches and tendrils shot out from behind him, as if to bind and devour Angela. Had Jean Genu suddenly changed his mind? Excited, he grabbed the little snake and shook it. He immediately stood up, ready to go search. At the ghost auction, the man had acquired a vampire soul and a girl who couldn't speak. When Jean Genu returned to the Garrow maze with a large group, Domi, who was waiting to greet them, was slightly taken aback. He immediately noticed the two females in the group, focusing on Angela, who posed the greatest threat to him. He inquired about her background. Jean Genu then introduced them, saying both were bought at the auction. The little girl was a maze baby named Yunche. He had given her this name. The blonde woman was a vampire named Angela, and her strength seemed considerable. Jean Genu learned from the control system that she was a legendary hero. Hearing this, Domi looked troubled and complained that the maze had neither money nor food. Jean Genu understood her little scheme. He stated that Angela's structure didn't require food. She was scientific. Moreover, she was just a bonus from buying things at the auction, costing nothing. As soon as he said this, Angela became displeased. She stepped forward to prove that Jean Genu had bought her for one low-grade gem. However, no one responded, leaving her standing there alone. Afterwards, Jean Genu asked Domi to arrange accommodation for Angela. But as for Yunxi, due to her poor condition, he planned to keep her close to care for her. This decision unexpectedly made Domi's hair stand on end. Clearly, there was a misunderstanding. If he knew what Domi was thinking, he'd probably want to dunk her in water to cleanse her mind. To help Yunxi adapt to the new environment, Jean Genu crouched down, his face calm but spoke in a commanding tone, telling her that if she needed anything in the maze besides coming to him, she could also find manager Domi, who was second in command of the Garrow maze. Domi, overhearing their conversation, immediately embraced her role as second in command. She picked up Yunxi, enthusiastically calling her daughter. Angela, who had long noticed Domi's extraordinary nature, was surprised to see a hero-level servant. But halfway through, he suddenly realized his secret room's defense was still so weak. It's worth noting that hero-level servants are extremely valuable in the underground world. Their difference from ordinary servants is that they can improve as the maze grows stronger. Jean Genu was naturally aware of Domi's situation. Without Domi's management, the maze would surely be in chaos. He couldn't be a carefree, hands-off boss. Everyone was tired from the past few days of running around. He instructed Yuz and Lisa to go rest first. Suddenly, the black merchant called out to him from behind. Jean Genu calmly told him to find Domi for accommodation. He shouldn't think too much about other things. In fact, Jean Genu was deliberately leaving him aside. It was because this black merchant was too greedy, wanting him to help expand his business to the human world. He was well aware of the stakes involved. If this were to happen, allowing the black merchant organization to sell strange items from the underground world to the human world, it would inevitably lead to disaster. So when the merchant proposed this idea, Jean Genu firmly rejected it. However, after being rebuffed by Jean Genu, the black merchant turned to Angela, asking her to collect information about the human world if she had the chance to enter it with Jean Genu and report back to him. As they were secretly plotting, Jean Genu came over to send the black merchant away, then decided to take Angelo along to familiarize her with the Garrow maze. After the tour, Angelo was secretly amazed. What if while he was out, some monsters came to steal from his home? What should he do then? But soon he had an idea that was to simply go all in and use these few gemstones to upgrade the secret room again. The maze was clean and tidy, everything was in order. Moreover, there were heartwarming scenes of beast men and dragon men playing together, unlike any maze she had seen before. She couldn't help but open up, saying that although his maze was small, it was well managed and had everything a nobleman should have. It wasn't like the version circulating in noble circles. Hearing this, Jean Genu became interested and gestured for her to continue. You became a nobleman in less than a year, so you're instinctively rejected by many old-school nobles. They say you disrupted the originally peaceful situation on the 9th floor. Of course, some nobles are very interested in you, including my former master, Count Tori, because the 11th floor where Count Tori is located is now at a stalemate. You hope for someone like Jean Genu to come and break the peaceful situation on the 11th floor. At this point, Angela also spoke frankly about her secret with Count Tori. To leave Count Tori and achieve blood-drinking freedom, Angela agreed that Count Tori would lure her new master to defeat his enemies on the 11th floor. Jin Genu, understanding the truth, didn't seem surprised at all. Perhaps he had already guessed that there's no such thing as a free lunch. He was still pondering Angela's words. If the Garo maze develops too quickly, the surrounding mazes will certainly feel threatened. They might very likely form an alliance to keep an eye on him. It must be quite difficult to rule a floor with just one maze. Seeing him lost in thought, Angela thought he was unwilling to get involved in the 11th floor's conflicts. Said and done, he ran straight to the front and threw the gemstones into the altar. With the system's prompt, Kim Jinwoo returned to reality. She slowly moved closer, intending to snuggle up to Jin Jinyu. Jin Jinyu immediately came to his senses and pushed her away. He frankly said that he was still busy dealing with the undead lord on the 9th floor, and it would probably take a long time to reach the 11th floor. Angela wasn't actually in a hurry. After all, her agreement with Count Tori had no set time limit. The two of them pushed and shoved their way to the room door. Unexpectedly, as soon as Angela entered the room, she started complaining that it was small and dirty. It was just like a prison cell, but there was nothing that a cup of the master's blood couldn't solve. Hearing this, Jin Genu didn't want to deal with her anymore. He didn't care about Angela's vampire identity to begin with, but the Garo maze doesn't support idlers. He warned Angela to quickly prove her value, then left without looking back. The next day, Jin Jinyu returned to the surface to inquire about some recent news from the merchant. Unexpectedly, as soon as they met, the merchant gave him some big news. A month ago, an explorer accidentally inherited a maze on the 4th underground floor. This immediately startled Jin Jinyu, while also making him doubt the reliability of this information, because anyone who wasn't a fool wouldn't go around announcing that they had inherited a maze. Regarding Jin Jinyu's doubts, the merchant rolled his eyes and explained impatiently that not everyone had level 12 strength like him, able to explore mazes alone. That explorer was with the team, so his inheritance was witnessed by his teammates. Moreover, that explorer didn't have the strength to kill the entire exploration team. As a result, when the team returned, the news quickly spread. Then the merchant revealed another big piece of news to him. The ghosts and monsters of the underground maze had formed a community, and they had recently held an auction. An enslaved underground baby and ordinary firearms could be auctioned for thousands of velvet gems. Just now did he consume gemstones worth tens of millions again. He had successfully moved further away from his small goal. This news greatly shocked Jin Genu. Recalling the auction, he hadn't seen any other humans there. It seemed that others, like him, had made contact with the Black Merchant organization, but what he cared more about now was the whereabouts of the explorer who inherited the maze on the 4th floor. However, the merchant informed him that the guy was killed yesterday. Apparently, the maze could make a lot of money, so his envious teammates killed him, attempting to take over the maze. Unexpectedly, the killer didn't gain ownership of the maze, causing it to revert to a masterless maze. At this point, the merchant suggested Jin Genu give it a try. He could provide all relevant information for free. Imagining that if Jin Genu could become a maze master, he, as Jin Genu's appraiser, could also benefit from it. To show sincerity, he immediately provided Jin Genu with another bombshell. But this news came from the Exploration Association, not from his own network. It was reported that they discovered something with enormous power and had sent people to explore it 2 weeks ago. You know the person in charge, it's that Foxmouse Sue. Then he continued to persuade gently, rather than wandering aimlessly in the underground maze. Why not go and try your luck? Actually, even if the merchant didn't say it, Jin Jinyu was destined to go, but now dark clouds took priority. He said he could leave right away. However, this tunnel would probably be a tough battle. The base to be attacked was a protagonist, to inherit the decision of the underground world. Now he finally understood why humans, even knowing the underground maze was dangerous, still flocked to it, even at the cost of their lives. Since it was so interesting here and he was bored to death recently anyway, he might as well play a big game in this underground maze and restore the glory of the Garura Empire. He went alone to the 7th underground floor to search. A spatial rift suddenly appeared next to Domi, seeing Jin Genu dressed in hunting gear emerge from it. She knew he had received another commission and was planning to go on a long journey. As the second in command of the maze, he must stay informed of Jin Genu's movements as the hands-off boss. After inquiring, he learned that Jin Genu planned to explore an empty maze on the 7th floor and might come into conflict with people from the Exploration Association. So he suggested that Jinjenu bring more people along from mutual support. Domi's reminder made Jinjenu recall that Songju indeed had several formidable experts under him, but Domi and Kanayan had to stay behind to maintain the maze's daily operations. Yellow Dragon was unreliable, and Tiger Girl Taya was still young and harbored great hostility towards humans. After pondering for a moment, he could only trouble his first knight used to accompany him. At this time, Angela, who had been eavesdropping, came forward to volunteer, clamoring to go along. Then she started talking about herself, saying she had the ability to detect creatures in the surrounding area, which could help Jinjenu avoid many unnecessary troubles. She also had stealth and disguise abilities, able to conceal her presence and traces, making her undetectable. Seeing Jinjenu still silent with a face full of doubt, she immediately activated her ability. Her blood-red cape instantly turned into blood, and in the blink of an eye, her figure merged into Jinjenu's shadow. Seeing she indeed had skills, Jinjenu agreed, but still warned her that if she tried to suck blood, he would flatten her into the ground. At this moment, Lisa called out to Jinjenu from behind. The man was unexpectedly bitten by a snake on his arm, and surprisingly inherited an ancient Garora clan's maze. He thought she also wanted to come along, but unexpectedly, she suggested that Jinjenu take Yunchai with him. Because after interacting with her for the past few days, she unexpectedly discovered that Yunxi had the ability to create maps. She could record everything she saw onto a map, but this special ability seemed very stimulating to Jinjenu, who had a system map. Yunxi seemed to understand the meaning of their conversation. She stepped forward and grabbed his cloak. Immediately, Jinjenu received a system prompt. Yunxi is sharing her ability with you. Looking closely, he found that Yunxi's map could merge with the system map and could use him as a marker for real-time positioning. It was like a high-precision human GPS. Since that was the case, she could come along with him taking care of her. He would definitely not let Yunxi get hurt again, but Yunchai's departure made Domi, who had already assumed a motherly role, uneasy. He didn't dare to go against Jinjenius' decision and could only anxiously come forward to instruct Yunchai like a caring mother, telling her to be careful on the road and take good care of herself. The group of four thus set out from the Garo maze, heading towards the entrance of the 8th floor. At this point, they have been traveling for 2 days and hadn't encountered even a single wild beast. But it's no wonder their luxurious team, consisting of 2 maze masters and a high-level vampire, must have scared away the beasts with their aura long ago. However, along the way, Knight Hughes, who was in charge of leading the way, was full of complaints. Seeing his frustrated look, Jinjenu couldn't help but ask. Hughes, as a finding an outlet, turned and pointed at Angela, accusing, "This woman doesn't seem like a good person. She never knocks when entering his room." He also obtained these 6 short and stubby cute pets. This situation was a bit awkward. He didn't know how to resolve it. Then he saw Hughes turn around and mutter pitifully that this was his 3rd consecutive field trip and he hadn't had a good rest for a long time. Jinjenu was confused. Haven't they rested for a day after the auction ended? But how could he know that this couch potato Hughes used to take at least a day off after each adventure? As someone who knew how to make promises, he immediately stated that he would give him a promotion after this exploration was over. Of course, the premise was that the undead lord would immediately stay at home and not cause trouble. This finally appeased the disgruntled youths. Soon, the group arrived at the entrance of the 8th floor. To avoid being discovered by the entrance guards, they exerted all their strength and quickly climbed up to the 8th floor. Unexpectedly, as soon as they reached the 8th floor, Yu's condition became miserable. Jinjenu thought he was still in a bad mood, but it didn't seem like an act. Upon asking, he learned that Yu's had never been to different floors. But what did this exhausted state have to do with the floor? Angela, however, wasn't surprised. She explained that some species become weaker the further they are from their birthplace. So many maze masters have never left the floor they were born on. Yus was clearly in this situation. It seemed that his strength might be reduced by about 20% for each floor he moved. It was precisely for this reason that humans ultimately won the war. Hearing this, Jinjinu also recalled that, as Angela said, when humans and the underground maze went to war. Who would have thought that those bodyguards, lost in their mutual boasting, actually wanted to stay and kill more monsters? The ramhorn monster they had just easily disposed of was worth several million. If a group of monsters came now and each person killed 2, they could each earn over 10 million. That's much more than what they were paid for this job. However, in this maze, apart from a broken chair from 82, there was only air left. The maze's main force was mostly beasts from the middle and upper layers. They hardly saw any intelligent beings from the deep underground. Then Angela didn't forget to mock Yuz, saying he gets more excited the higher he goes. This made Yu furious but unable to refute, his green face even swelled up with anger. Seeing them start to bicker again without seriousness, Jinju urged them to leave quickly lest they attract the attention of those at the entrance. Unexpectedly, Angela's next words nearly made Jinju choke. She had already sensed about 50 monsters approaching to surround them. Indeed, Angela must have done this on purpose. The monsters were almost here, and only then did she say time was pressing. He immediately ordered Yuz to disguise and hide. Yuz instantly turned into a puddle of slime and enveloped Yuz. However, the scene before him made Jinju instantly furious. Yunxi, wrapped in slime, almost suffocated inside. He hurriedly reminded him, which made Yuz come to his senses and create an illusion. But what was the point of this guy disguising himself as a green rock? Was he afraid of not being conspicuous enough? There was no time to beat him up now. He immediately told Angela to hide in his shadow and activated his disguise skill. In an instant, Jinju's form turned out to be Angela's stealth skill shared with him. This enhanced Jinju's disguise skill to invisibility. The stacked buffs were so overpowered that they could conceal his aura and erase all traces. A few seconds later, a large group of fat-headed pig brain monsters appeared. The sleazy pig heads stretched out their noses and sniffed around where Jinju and his group had been. Then there was a tremor as they issued orders to search the surrounding area. Even rats would cry if they came here. To open up the situation, he gritted his teeth and sacrificed a few velvet gemstones. He was certain that they must be hiding somewhere nearby. Jinju saw that the arrivals were actually a group of intelligent elves. He began to consider how to make them obediently lead the way and become his pawns. To avoid danger, the vampire woman turned into a mist of blood and disappeared into the man's shadow. Other companions also revealed their true forms. One transformed into an oddly green rock. Only then did Jinju's form dissipate. He hid behind a rock, silently observing the movements of these pig monsters. At this moment, Angela's voice sounded in his mind. Strange, she seemed to have the same ability as Domi to communicate with him telepathically. He learned that Angela could only communicate telepathically when she merged into a shadow. Meanwhile, the dozens of pig creatures below were busy sniffing the lingering scents in the air. They completely failed to notice the genius used transformed into a green rock. Although these pig monsters were somewhat stupid, the two leaders had wise expressions. They clearly possessed some intelligence, Jinju suspected. They belonged to a certain maze faction on the 8th floor. He began to consider how to subjugate them as his allies on the 8th floor. After all, this was their first time on the 8th floor. They had no idea how to get to the 7th floor. After sharing his thoughts with Angela, she asked if he had a noble seal with him. Because a noble seal could release noble pressure, which had a strong deterrent effect on ordinary monsters and could force them to do things for you. Hearing this, Jinju immediately had an idea. His form instantly dissipated. Old Wang next door said those gems were worth tens of millions. Soon after the maze upgrade was completed, it prompted that 2 types of troops could now be summoned. The next second, like a ghost, he appeared behind the long-haired pig that seemed to be the leader. His sudden appearance startled the long-haired pig out of its wits. Seeing that the newcomer was just a weak human, it quickly regained its composure. It immediately attacked. Its hands separated and 2 huge rocks suddenly rose from the ground. Then with a wave of its hand, the rock smashed towards where Jinju was standing. The movement was smooth, causing the big nose pigs to cheer for it. Unexpectedly, the human figure in the dust remained motionless. Jinju stomped his foot, dispersing the surrounding dust. He slowly walked towards the long-haired pig, who was now paralyzed with fear. In this life-or-death moment, the long-haired pig became even more vicious. It struggled to stand, planning to use its technique again. It tried to use its signature skill, Earth Array. However, this time Jinju didn't intend to give it another chance. He leaped up with a tie, flying kick straight to its weak spot. The fallen long-haired pig was pinned under Jinju's foot. He quietly activated the Baron's ring on his hand, which represented the noble seal. With a flash of dazzling starlight, a pale golden light symbolizing noble pressure emanated from the ring. This pressure instantly spread throughout the area, instilling an irresistible fear in the pig monsters' hearts. Kneeled down. At this point, one had to admire Jinju's plan. Originally, he could have shown the ring to reveal his identity first, but to better control the pig herd and maintain the initiative, he deliberately displayed his invincible strength earlier. Now that the effect had been achieved, he revealed his intention of needing a guide. The first type was called Gara Guardian, known as the Fearless Ones, skilled in various combat techniques. The second type was a high-intelligence management troop. They could handle maze affairs in peace and lead troops in war, but had weak combat abilities. They were purely intellectual workers. Understanding the noble's needs, the long-haired pig and big-nosed pig immediately transformed into left and right guardians. They started shouting orders within the pig herd. Of course, this was also used most glorious moment as a knight, walking proudly at the front of the team. But as they walked, Angela noticed something was off. The pig creatures kept casting greasy glances at her, intentionally or not. This feeling made her uncomfortable, her whole body itchy. She couldn't help but scold them. Who would have thought things weren't as she imagined? Faced with her angry rebuke, the pig creatures were terrified, begging her not to suck their blood. This scene aroused Jean Jenny's curiosity. He looked at Angela with a meaningful, indescribable gaze. Angela disdainfully bit Jean Jenny. This also reminded him that a few years ago, he had indeed heard of a group of vampires who had come to the 8th floor and carried out a massacre against the pig herd, probably because the blood of these pig creatures tasted better than other monsters. She even suggested Jean Genu capture a few to raise. Surprisingly, her suggestion actually intrigued Jean Genu, and he started to seriously consider it. Their conversation was naturally overheard by the surrounding pig creatures, who were all instantly scared into a cold sweat. Just then, an angry roar came from the front. Looking up, they saw several pig creatures shoot out from the dust. Angela immediately warned Jean Genu to be cautious, as something seemed to be happening ahead. As soon as she finished speaking, an extremely thin and angry pig monster furiously charged towards the pig herd, instantly reaching their front. The long-haired pig and big-nosed pig immediately went to meet it, anxiously explaining Jean Genu and his group's identity and intentions. Jean Genu also timely released his noble pressure. However, this powerful pig monster was the chief of the Tusk Boar tribe, possessing the strength to resist the noble's seal. Both types of troops were excellent and urgently needed, but the only thing that displeased him was the summoned soldiers required a certain amount of gems to be consumed monthly. Even so, he couldn't completely resist the noble pressure released by the ring. His heart now harbored some reverence, as he knew that nobles who could own vampires were not to be underestimated. So he respectfully inquired about Jean Genu and his group's origins. After a brief conversation, he learned that Jean Genius' group wanted to pass through his tribe's territory. To reach the entrance to the 7th floor, he immediately tried to stop them. Unexpectedly, as soon as he finished speaking, Jean Genius immediately drew his sword, ready for battle. Frightened, he hurriedly spoke to stop him, explaining it was because of war. Seeing this, Jean Genius calmed down and gestured for him to continue. It turned out that Batten was currently in a state of chaotic warfare. If Jean Jenny's group forced their way through, they might get trapped between various factions. Even a powerful noble would have difficulty passing through. Realizing how complex the situation was, Jean Jenny felt overwhelmed. If he arrived late, the empty maze on the 7th floor might fall in his Song's hands. At this moment, Zhuang seemed to sense Jin Jinyu's dilemma. He immediately spoke up, saying he could deploy troops to divert the attention of other mazes on the 8th floor and clear a path for Jin Jinyu's group. His words immediately piqued Jin Jinyu's interest. He slightly raised his head, looking at Zhu Wang with curiosity. He wouldn't believe that Zhu Wang would pay such a high price just to please a noble he had never met before. Sure enough, the next second Zhu Wang gently stated his purpose. He needed Jean Genyu to return to the 8th floor after finishing his business on the 7th floor to help him with a small favor. This made him even more eager to obtain velvet gems. Now he could only count the days on his fingers. Judging from his expression, this small favor was certainly not small. Moreover, could Yu Wang's words be trusted? How should Jean Genyu decide on this? To avoid attacks from ghosts, the man actually sought help from a pig. Their plan was for the Pig King to distract the ghosts, while Jean Genyu promised to help the Pig King with a small favor after succeeding. After reaching an agreement, Jean Genu and his group were left in the Wild Boar tribe to rest briefly. The Pig King took his 2 henchmen pigs to patrol the territory and prepare for the long journey. After all, he had to attract the attention of various forces on the 8th floor. To buy Jean Genu at least 3 days of travel time, he instructed his 2 henchmen to increase patrols around the area during his absence. They only needed to defend and hold their ground until he returned. Because the Crimson Lions from the 7th floor would occasionally come down to the 8th floor to harass the Wild Boar tribe, having arranged everything, the Pig King took his leave. The 2 henchmen pigs immediately made a sound, then they got down on all fours and started moving. Suddenly, the two henchman pigs who hadn't gone far felt a surge of powerful energy emanating from behind. Before they could turn around, the pig king's form had already pierced through the rock wall. Disappearing without a trace, turning back, they only saw a bottomless tunnel. The pig king's two large tusks were certainly not for show. With his summon, a spatial rift appeared out of thin air in front of him. Combined with his terrifying energy, he was undoubtedly a formidable vanguard. Afterwards, Gene Genius Group came to the tunnel that the Pig King had opened for them. According to the plan, the Pig King would create a big commotion on the 8th floor, attracting beasts and ghosts from within a 3-day journey radius. This would buy Gene Jenny's group enough time to safely reach the entrance to the 7th floor. Gene Jenny took out the map, confirmed the direction and route. And then the group began to hurry on their journey. 3 days later, at the entrance to the 7th floor of the underground maze. Although Gene Jinyu's group had successfully reached the 7th floor, as soon as they entered, they were unluckily caught in the middle of a battle between various factions of the 7th floor. What was originally a 3-way battle suddenly became a situation where the 3 factions united to fight against their 4-person group. The situation was extremely dangerous and perilous. However, the number of ghosts was simply too great. Even though Gene Jinyu and Yuz used all their skills to protect Yunchai, they couldn't avoid all dangers. Just as a ghost claw was about to grab Yunchai, unexpectedly, Yunchai's aura suddenly changed. She tilted her body and lowered her head to dodge the incoming claw, then countered with a punch that pierced through the ghost body. Surprisingly, after doing all this, she quickly reverted to her previous innocent demeanor. The commotion behind naturally caught Jin Zhen's attention. He was shocked, not expecting Yunxi to have hidden such depths. While relieved that Yunxi had her own skills, he still felt the need to confirm again. After a flash of dazzling white light, a formidable Garora guardian stood before him. He immediately flashed to Yunxi's side, asking if she had master combat skills. Yinchai immediately nodded in response, so Jin Zhenu handed over his large sword to her. As Yinchai took the sword, her aura changed once again. In an instant, she leaped up with a reverse grip on the sword, easily claiming first blood. She then flashed towards other ghosts, her movements smooth and fluid, as if killing was her innate talent. However, Jin Zhenu was still worried about accidents happening to her, so he ordered Yuz to continue protecting her. Knight Yuz immediately became displeased. He complained about Jin Zhen Yuz's differential treatment of the old knight. In fact, Yuz was the most relaxed among them all. Transformed into slime, he could ignore all physical attacks from ghosts, though he consumed quite a bit of his gluttony fragments. On the other side, Angela's fighting style was full of elegance and composure. The blood from the ghosts he killed would be separated and suspended in the air. Then it would turn into blood blades to shoot other ghosts. Suddenly, a drop of blood splashed onto his glove. Out of bloodthirsty instinct, he licked it with his tongue, but immediately felt so disgusted he almost vomited last night's blood. At this moment, he noticed Jin Zhenyu had flashed behind him. He immediately greeted him eagerly, informing Jin Zhenyu that he only needed to deal with about 200 more ghosts to end the battle. But Jin Zhenyu didn't want to delay any further. The smell of blood on the battlefield was too strong. If they continued fighting, the blood scent would surely attract more beasts and ghosts, so he asked if there was a way to end the battle quickly. Hearing this, Angela immediately became interested, but he didn't show it. This set of weapons and equipment capable of both offense and defense looked quite reliable. Instead, he acted coy, claiming he knew such a technique, but it consumed a lot of energy. Since he got a cup of blood from Jin Jinyu, he had been using it sparingly. After the recent intense battle, he had very little left. Seeing his words, Jin Jinyu knew exactly what he was thinking, but at this moment he could only comply. He promised to give him 2 cups of blood as compensation afterwards. Successfully securing 2 cups of blood, Angela couldn't even bother to wipe the drool from his mouth. He immediately raised both hands with a thunderous motion. Instantly, the surrounding blood seemed to be summoned, swirling wildly. It condensed in the air, forming a bewitching, dripping blood color. In a moment, it wiped out all the ghosts on the battlefield, indeed worthy of a technique used by a legendary hero. But Angela was now exhausted, his face darkening. To comfort him, Jin Zhenyu once again promised to keep his word and arranged 2 full cups of love for him. Of course, what also dropped was his nightly image as he slumped down, no longer caring about appearances. Suddenly, a rumbling sound came. The ground beneath Yunchai's feet unexpectedly collapsed violently. By the time everyone reacted, Yunchai had already fallen into the ground. This sudden turn of events left everyone shocked. Jin Jinyu's energy instantly surged and roiled. With a burst of power, he rushed towards where Yunchai had disappeared. But strangely, the ground that had just collapsed was now restored to its original state. Jean Genu ordered used to transform in a slime and dig down to infiltrate, probably burning with anger. He turned and harshly rebuked Angela for not completely killing the ghosts, which allowed a magician to attack Yinchai, but Angela was most sensitive to magic and blood. Then he gave the Garura guardian the order to guard the warehouse. He was certain that there were no magical fluctuations or signs of life around. However, he didn't bring back good news either. He searched everywhere underground but still couldn't find Yunchai. But one thing he said shocked Jean Genu greatly. During his underground search, he couldn't even find Yunchai's traces or scent. It was as if she had been swallowed by the underground sword scorpion. These words reminded Jean Genu of when he and his sister had encountered something similar. They had unexpectedly fallen into the Gala maze. Could Yunchai be in a similar situation? At the same time, another thought arose in his mind. If that was the case, could Yunchai successfully inherit a maze? The girl, unable to speak, was sent to a ghost auction. After being bought by a man, he unexpectedly discovered that the girl not only possessed map drawing abilities compatible with the system, but also had terrifying strength to stand alone when facing danger. Just as everyone relaxed their guard after slaying all the ghosts, Yinchai was suddenly buried by an unexpected ground collapse. Luce immediately transformed into a shadowy puddle, infiltrating underground to search and rescue, but he found that Yunxi had already vanished without a trace. While Jean Genu and the others were frantically worried, they suddenly received a notification that the control system's map had been updated. Switching to the map interface, they saw that some new previously unvisited locations had been added. Kim Jin-woo, standing nearby, heard these delusional words. He said no more and decided to take his sister and the rich kid out first. This guy's large build could probably single-handedly push through levels 1 to 3 of the underground maze. Next, he consumed 2 low-grade gems to summon the management-type troop. It must be the map information synchronized by Yunchai. This slightly eased everyone's minds. From the current situation, it could be deduced that Yunchai was most likely summoned by a certain maze, just like when Jean Genu was originally summoned by the Gala maze. Instantly transported from the first floor of the maze to the 9th floor, everyone immediately decided to set out to find Yunchai based on the map's guidance. To speed up and avoid entanglement with ghosts along the way, Jinjin activated his invisibility skill. They moved swiftly across rooftops and walls without stopping. This gave our acrophobic Yusei a real taste of the thrill of a roller coaster. He screamed and yelled all the way, rendering Jean Genu's invisibility skill practically useless. However, Jean Genu, who was now anxious and impatient, couldn't care less about that. If he didn't find Yunchai quickly, he would literally starve himself to death. Due to being enslaved since childhood, he had lost the ability to take care of himself. Suddenly, Angela noticed signs of many creatures moving in the area ahead. Jean Genu immediately landed carefully on a cliff. Through investigation, they discovered several sizable expedition teams. It seemed they were all here to search for the empty maze on the 7th floor. Following their direction, Jean Genu and his group also arrived at a camp. However, this was clearly the entrance to a maze and many people had already gathered there. But they seemed to belong to different factions. Both sides were arguing heatedly, looking ready to come to blows. Another spatial rift appeared in front of him. Suddenly, the situation became tense. His old acquaintance, red-haired Songja, was also present. Presumably, both sides wanted to claim this empty maze for themselves. Jean Genu was certain that neither group knew how to inherit a maze, so he didn't bother hiding to watch the show. The urgent matter was to find Yunchai first. Soon, following the map's guidance, they arrived at the entrance of a maze. Through Angela's reconnaissance, they confirmed that Yunxi's life signs were present inside. Given this, the group had to be extra cautious. They carefully entered this maze that exuded an eerie atmosphere from every corner. Little did they know that the moment they entered the maze, they seemed to trigger some kind of prohibition, causing the tattered clown mask hanging at the top of the maze to flash with creepy light. The group that entered the maze didn't know how long they had been walking. Although they hadn't encountered any monsters, the surroundings were so quiet they could hear their own heartbeats. And the further they went, the stronger the feeling of déjà vu grew in their hearts. So he turned to ask Yusei and Angela if they had the same feeling. To his surprise, there was no one behind him. His hair immediately stood on end. He called out their names loudly instantly. He felt everything here was bizarre because these two couldn't possibly disappear from his perception without a trace. He tried to calm himself and planned to bring up the map to determine their location, but unexpectedly, he couldn't access the map interface at all. The rift before his eyes was unexpectedly large. After multiple attempts, there was still no response. He even found that he couldn't activate his parasitic mode now. This plunge briefly stabilized mind back into panic. Suddenly, a deep voice came from behind, advising him that if he wanted to rest, he didn't need to make such a big fuss. This startled Jingenyu, his pupils dilating in shock. He turned abruptly to see a scruffy-looking uncle looking at him calmly. Seeing Jingenyu unmoved, the uncle continued irritably. "Next time you want to slack off, give me a heads up, I'll cover for you. Otherwise, if the ghosts discover us, our entire team will be punished. We might even become their food." After saying this, he affectionately patted Jingenu's head. He continued speaking, "When you just fell asleep, did you have a dream? Did you dream that you were the master of the maze? And that you were possessed by a parasite, even growing legs and arms like a spider?" "That was just a nightmare, don't worry about it." Faced with his teasing, Jingenyu remained silent from beginning to end. Seeing this, the uncle thought that Jingenyu hadn't fully awakened from his recent sleep. He laughed loudly and walked ahead, jokingly cursing, "You little brat. After a nap you almost forget me, your captain." At this moment, Jingenyu replied firmly from behind, "I remember, but you're fake." The control system also popped up a prompt at this time. Due to the activation of a mysterious intermittent spring, this summon would be. Unexpectedly, as soon as he finished speaking, the captain grabbed his face and lifted him up, ready to give him some tough love. Just then, someone called out to the captain from behind. They invited him over to continue the story from yesterday that he hadn't finished. However, the captain was worried that such a large group slacking off would be punished by the ghosts. The purple-haired man didn't seem concerned, as he had already arranged for someone to keep watch. Seeing this, the captain decided not to dampen everyone's spirits and began to tell the story. In fact, Jingenyu was familiar with every face here. Everyone had always taken good care of him, this child born in the maze. From them, Jingenyu learned that there was actually a wonderful world above ground, completely different from the underground maze. Each of them had different occupations and lives on the surface. The purple-haired man was once a national idol. He often told Jingenyu about his highlights as an idol, but the purple-haired man was killed in an explosion when war broke out. As Jingenyu thought of this, the purple-haired man's body inexplicably exploded into a mass of blood. Jingenyu remained unmoved and turned to look at the old man nearby. He was a baker who had promised to make Jingenyu the best bread in the world. He too had lost his life during the war, infected by poison. As Jingenyu thought of this, the old man's body also exploded. There was also Army Sergeant Li Zhishua, who sacrificed himself to cover his teammates, and Chef Wu Han, who was eaten by beasts while protecting him. Everyone Jingenyu recalled now exploded into blood before his eyes. Now only the captain standing beside him remained. The captain looked at him with satisfaction and nodded. In his mind, he recalled the captain's final fate, being impaled through the abdomen by a monster's tentacle, dying in Jingenyu's arms. The name Jingenyu was actually given by the captain. It was the captain's death that made Jingenyu understand the vastness of death. Using the captain's name might be the only memento he left. After all, the time spent living with the captain and the others was Jingenyu's happiest period. A hero-class Garora manager, Dominic, before Kim Jin-woo could react, a graceful figure appeared before his eyes. "Thank you, this maze, for letting me immerse myself once again in the illusion of past happiness. But ironically, it's also a tragic memory I'm most reluctant to recall." Clearly, this illusion was created by the maze based on Jingenyu's inner thoughts. But as he recalled the tragic deaths of his teammates, it allowed him to see through the false hope before him and regain his senses. The underground maze, dormant for 200 years, had inexplicably summoned this mute girl. To rescue the girl, his companions had fearlessly entered this maze. Unexpectedly, the maze was bizarrely unpredictable. It had trapped the companions who came to rescue the girl in an illusion they couldn't escape. If it weren't for Jingenyu's special circumstances, having both joyful and painful memories, allowing him to wake up at the last moment, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Jingenyu glanced at Yusei, who was sound asleep and couldn't be woken up no matter what. This irritated him, having just escaped from the illusion himself. He raised his hand and punched Yusei's other hand, forcibly pulling him up. This startled Angela, who was feeling dizzy nearby, making her quickly come to her senses. But judging from her state, she had clearly also fallen for the illusion. But before they could figure out the situation, a hissing sound came from deep within the maze. Looking up, they saw a large group of clowns wearing eerie masks. Clearly, this maze was not friendly towards these intruders. Seeing this, they realized that diplomacy was out and violence was in, but they also secretly felt relieved that the maze hadn't attacked while they were trapped in the illusion. "What's going on?" Cosplay made outfit with a lowly voice. He brought up the control interface to understand. The one before him was extraordinary. Jinjinyu immediately activated his parasitic form with a thought. In the next second, his arm transformed into a cluster of thick, terrifying tentacles, shooting towards the clowns. Several large mouths emerged from the tentacles, devouring the entangled clowns one by one. However, this scene didn't look like a battle, but more like a massacre to vent anger. In fact, the observant Angela had already noticed Jinju's abnormality. It was evident from the wake-up service he had just provided for Yusei. So with some concern, she reminded Jinju that if he continued this destructive behavior, the maze might collapse. Her words made Jinju realize that his state was indeed problematic. He immediately composed himself, eliminating the lingering anger in his heart, but verbally he didn't admit it, claiming that he wasn't a tyrant who liked to destroy everything. However, our knight Yusei immediately questioned this. As expected, he was knocked unconscious by a heavy arm and dragged deeper into the maze. On the way forward, they encountered some traps, but nothing remarkable. Later, it seemed that besides creating illusions, the maze had nothing else to offer. They arrived at a stone door without much incident. At this time, Angela also detected Yun-Shi's aura just behind the stone door. Hearing this, Jinju immediately activated his parasitic form. He threw a powerful punch, shattering the stone door. Wasn't it someone who just said he wasn't a violent person? But that was clearly no longer important as Yinzai appeared before them unharmed. She was a true management genius dedicated to helping the master handle various affairs. At this moment, Kim Jinwoo maintained a poker face, but inwardly sighed, "What a treasure I found." It seemed that, as Jin Jinyu had predicted, she had remained in this state since being teleported in. He stepped forward and ordered Yuan Zai to take over this maze in a commanding tone. Yuan Zai obediently nodded. In an instant, a huge carnival poster appeared before everyone. Then a deck of cards sprang out from within, lifting Yun-Shi high up, seemingly synchronizing maze data with her. Such a flashy and extravagant synchronization was indeed rare to see. Soon, a tear-shaped mark appeared on Yun-Shi's face, indicating that she had completed the maze synchronization. Jin Jinyu immediately stepped forward, drawing on his experience of receiving the gala maze. He guided Yun-Shi step by step through the real name authentication. A few minutes later, this maze named Carnival suddenly lit up with a dazzling white light. In an instant, the originally dark and eerie maze underwent a dramatic transformation. At this point, it meant that Yinchai had synchronized and reorganized with the maze data. Genius scanned around and found that, just like when he first received the gala maze, only one door had been extended in the initial state of the new maze. Then he impressively took out a velvet gem and tossed it onto the altar. The energy of the velvet gem was instantly absorbed by the altar. Next, the maze would enter a one-day repair and upgrade state. Now there was only one last step left, which was the moment for the black-hearted old party to deceive people and connect the divine artifact. Just like that, Yunxi unknowingly became the second knight under Jin Jinyu's command. It seemed today he could drive a Ferrari one-handed was just around the corner, so he immediately started arranging tasks. "Dominic, that name is too long, I'll call you Domi from now on." Next, he taught Yunxi how to open the portal, but no matter how Jin Jinyu instructed. Yunxi always looked at him with a blank expression. This child seemed to genuinely not know how to speak. Accidentally, she ended up opening Jin Jinyu's portal instead. The next second, Domi poked his head out from the portal. After a brief conversation, he learned that the maze before him was inherited by Yunxi. Domi immediately transformed into Mama Domi, joyfully picking up Yin-Shi, ready to hug and lift her high. Now it seemed that the purpose of this trip to the 7th floor was basically achieved, but Jin Jinyu still wanted to understand Song's movements. He instructed Domi to have Huang Long and Tia stay to guard this carnival maze, while Yin-Shi should be taken back to the gala maze to be well cared for. As for the unfortunate Yusei, he was in a pitiful state. This trip had consumed many of his embraced stone avatars, causing his entire form to shrink by several sizes. Unable to bear driving him further, Jin Jinyu also let him return to recuperate. He only took Angela with him as they headed towards the maze she had discovered. At this time, there were still many people surrounding that maze. To gather more information, he had Angela merge into his shadow. He himself activated his invisibility skill and infiltrated the camp, wandering around for a while. He roughly understood the situation. It started when someone discovered this cave maze, but as soon as She's expedition team arrived, they forcibly occupied it under the name of the Exploration Association. They brutally drove away other expedition teams trying to approach the maze, which led to the conflict. After understanding the situation, Jinyu couldn't help but become interested in this maze. Then he shared the map information with Domi. After some understanding, they found that near the Gerwara maze, there were not only ore veins, but also plants that could produce velvet jams. To make a reasonable maintenance plan, the two decided to do a field investigation first. So he deliberately exposed himself, letting people discover him this elusive black shadow. He caused quite a commotion, making the expedition team think that an extremely fast monster hadn't infiltrated the camp. As expected, the commotion outside caught She's attention inside the maze, thinking other expedition teams were causing trouble again. He ordered the soldiers to guard the entrance well, then angrily walked out of the maze. Little did he know, as soon as he left, Jinyu had already flashed behind the soldiers. After knocking out 2 soldiers, he swaggered into the hall. Could this guy be planning to have Angela inherit a maze too? The vampire ghost was originally the pinnacle of power in the underground world, but now she bowed for just 2 bowls of blood, willingly accompanying the man breaking into this heavily guarded maze. After swiftly knocking out 2 guards, Jinyu strutted along the passage towards the main hall of the maze. Strangely, he encountered neither traps nor branching corridors along the way. He didn't even see the structure supporting the maze's core. It seemed this was just a small maze. But upon reaching the main hall, Jinyu realized his earlier speculation might be wrong because judging from the specifications of the emblems on the hall walls and the style of the altar, it was clear that this maze was originally at least level 3 or above. Now it was just dormant or in self-hibernation reduced to about level 2, so driven by curiosity, he activated his scouting eye. So after a field survey, Domi proposed many plans beneficial to the development of the Gerara maze. For example, breaking through fragile cave walls, shortening the path to the ore veins, and setting up collection stations along the way. The next second, a flash of light passed through his eyes. Indeed, there was a surprise. Something good seemed to be hidden inside the altar. He immediately increased the power of his scouting eye, scanning the cracks on the altar's emblem. Through the cracks, he could faintly see a dim light emanating from within. Through the analysis of the control system, Jinyu was instantly shocked. Hidden inside the altar was the core hub of this maze. He instinctively reached out to touch it but felt a strong sense of rejection. Clearly, this ownerless maze refused his imprint. At this time, Angela also came forward to investigate. She then reminded Jinyu that if the maze core was left to hibernate here, it was very likely that people outside would reactivate. Saying this, she looked directly at Jinyu beside her. His intention was already clear without words. If humans were to master the method of activating mazes, it could potentially form a new power, inevitably causing a storm of maze seizures in the human world. At that time, a great war for underground mazes would erupt between the underground world and the human world. Considering this, Jinyu immediately activated his parasitic form. He suddenly extended his void, enhanced with hardening skills, attempting to forcibly extract the dormant maze core. The core seemed to sense the deadly threat and instantly erupted with fierce resistance. Suddenly, the entire maze shook violently, accompanied by thunderous roars. It felt like a terrifying abyssal beast was about to emerge, causing everyone present to change color with extreme fear. Meanwhile, Songju also noticed the abnormality and a maze behind him. He immediately gathered his men to investigate the maze. Their movement was immediately sensed by Angela, who hurriedly reminded Jinyu to speed up as the Exploration Association's people were about to enter. Hearing this, Jinyu's expression changed. He channeled all his energy, pushing his parasitic form to the extreme. The enormous energy instantly shattered the altar like a hurricane through dry twigs. Taking advantage of the moment, he reached in and firmly grasped the core. Kim Jinwoo was a child rescued from the underground maze over 10 years ago. But his sister was reluctant to leave, thinking this would be great filming material. She was about to speak when she was silenced by Kim Jinwoo's cold gaze. At the same time, arrangements were made for harvesting velvet jams near the intermittent spring. Of course, since they were already there, they naturally had to pick the jams that had already formed. At this time, the control system also sent a prompt about forcibly extracting the maze core. By now, Songja and his large group in the passage were just a few steps away from the hall. However, as they stepped into the maze hall, they were instantly shocked by the scene before them. Their hearts skipped a beat involuntarily. It was an extremely terrifying monster. While they were stunned, the beast had already opened its bloody maw and pounced towards them. To be fair, the group of people with Songja did have high combat quality. They were even able to form a formation to respond. But how could they withstand the beast's savage attack? Their carefully arranged formation was instantly shattered. The beast's tentacles even wrapped around several people's bodies, throwing them outside the door. The commotion erupting inside the maze immediately drew the attention of everyone outside. As they were puzzled, various desperate screams and cries for help suddenly came from within. The next second, Songji and his companions' figures emerged from the billowing dust. Falling to the ground in a miserable state, Songji, without time to think, frantically ordered his subordinates to prepare for battle. As soon as he finished speaking, that terrifying beast rushed out of the maze, appearing before everyone. But in an instant, the beast dove back into the maze in front of everyone's eyes. This scene immediately left everyone puzzled. Did it disdain them as insects too weak to bother with? Or was it saying that as long as they didn't enter the maze to disturb it, it was fine? Kim Jin-woo was dumbfounded, secretly giving a thumbs up. This girl knows how to live well. This behavior of considering it a loss if you don't pick up money when you go out, isn't it the excellent quality of a manager? A teammate beside Songja asked if they should pursue the beast, only to be angrily scolded by Songja. He had just personally experienced the beast's immense power. With their group, they weren't even enough to fill its teeth. Being able to escape with their lives was already lucky. How could they dare to continue risking their lives? He immediately ordered to pack up and evacuate the area. After all, their camp had already been exposed to the beast. They definitely couldn't continue to stay and camp here. Deep inside the maze, Jin Jinyu was now lying exhausted on the ground, vomiting uncontrollably. The parasite had also been worn out by this ordeal and entered a dormant state. The brief 10-second ordeal was an enormous strain for both him and the parasite. Fortunately, they succeeded in scaring off the people outside the maze. Otherwise, the consequences would have been unthinkable. To prevent Songja from returning and to study the use of the maze core step by step, they had to leave this maze immediately, but not to return to the Garo maze. Instead, they would return to the 8th floor to fulfill the promise made to the kings earlier. Arriving at the Tusk Boar tribe on the 8th floor, Hung and Ha, the two boars, naturally knew about his agreement with the Boar King. They immediately led him to the Boar Kings. Seeing the Boar King again shocked him. In just a few days, the Boar King had fallen into such a miserable state. 3 horrifying scars extended from his head all the way to his chest. Moreover, one of his huge tests was broken and his aura had become weak. He was sitting on the throne, sleeping deeply. After inquiring with Hong and Ha, he learned that when the Boar King helped him divert the 8th floor's monsters, he unexpectedly encountered his mortal enemy, the Crimson Lion King, who had come down from the 7th floor. They immediately engaged in a fierce battle, ending in mutual destruction. Jin Jinyu immediately became puzzled. Wasn't it said that the Crimson Lion King would just come to catch a few pigs for a snack and leave? It shouldn't have led to such a life or death struggle. After further explanation from Hong and Ha, he understood the hidden story. There were also defensive works, drinking water supply, and other details all planned out. It was because the Crimson Lion King, to escape the chaotic situation on the 7th floor, had consumed a large amount of maze core energy to move his entire maze from the 7th floor to the 8th floor. And the reason the 8th floor fell into chaos was mostly due to those monsters fleeing the 7th floor's chaos coming to the 8th floor and triggering territorial disputes. At this point, their conversation woke up the Boar King, seeing it was Jin Jinyu. He immediately tried to rise and greet him, enduring the pain, but his movement aggravated his injuries, causing him to wince in pain. Jin Jinyu quickly spoke to stop his movement. He stated that he had come as promised to fulfill his commitment, and also frankly explained that he hadn't expended much energy on the 7th floor. If he were to kill the Crimson Lion King, it would probably take about 10 days. Unexpectedly, the Boar King's intention wasn't to have him rescue them from the Lion King, but to help move his entire tribe to the 9th floor of the maze. The Boar King, with just 2 big teeth, could carve out territory on the 8th underground floor, yet he ended up in such a miserable state just to help the man with a small favor. The reason he was so willing to risk his life was to have the man help move his entire tribe to the 9th floor of the maze. Jin Jinyu never imagined the Boar King had such grand plans for him. Seeing Jin Jinyu's slight frown, seemingly feeling this request was a bit excessive, but given his current state, he truly lacked the strength to resist external threats. His expression changed as if he had made a major decision. He then stated that if Jin Jinyu agreed to help with this, he would voluntarily become Jin Jinyu's subordinate knight. The Boar King naturally knew what becoming a noble's nightmare, But for the survival of the entire wild boar tribe, he had no other choice. He hoped these conditions would be enough to move Jinjenu. Of course, to accomplish these things would require a large number of personnel. Indeed, upon hearing the Boar King's words, Jinjenu immediately had some objections. However, in business terms, Jinjenu didn't immediately express his stance. He silently weighed the pros and cons in his mind, but still wanted to probe the Boar King's attitude further. So, with a slightly arrogant attitude, he frankly stated that given the Boar King's current strength and the situation of the wild boar tribe, it was difficult for him to judge how much value these could provide to him and vice versa. What made the Boar King think he had the ability to protect the wild boar tribe? Hearing this, the Boar King's expression immediately changed, and his tone became suddenly serious. You were the first human from the 9th floor to obtain a noble seal, and with a maze established for only half a year, you successfully killed the Flood Dragon King and destroyed the Dragon Maze. He then continued with a series of flattering remarks, praising Jinjenu to the skies. Finally, even Jinjenu couldn't take it anymore and told him to stop. But it had to be said that the kings had indeed done thorough research on him and the Garrow Maze. From this, it could be deduced that the Boar King had indeed planned to leave the 8th floor early on, seeing that Jinjenu's attitude seemed to soften. The Boar King seized the opportunity to make another pitch. As you can see, without me, the wild boar tribe simply cannot function. These piglets only know how to eat, drink, and sleep all day. They can't do anything else. They live in constant fear, worrying about being hunted by powerful monsters. He then self-deprecatingly added that he used to be like that too, but to protect the piglets and change their inevitable fate. He had to stand up and fight back. It was through these battles that he honed himself and transformed into his current form, but relying on his strength alone was ultimately unsustainable. This kind of life had long exhausted him. Finally, he revealed that daring to receive Jinjenu in his weakened state was actually a gamble to see if Jinjenu would take advantage of the situation to attack him. So she suggested Kim Jin-woo increase manpower and upgrade the Garrow Maze as soon as possible, but Kim Jin-woo just wanted to be a hands-off boss. After he finished speaking, Jinjenu fell into deep thought. Angela suggested that Jinjenu accept the Boar King's forces, as the Boar King's strength was definitely at the peak of the 8th floor of the maze. Jinjenu also valued this point. He immediately decided to accept the Boar King as his third knight. However, now is not the time for the wild boar tribe to move to the 9th floor. Because he felt that the 9th floor was about to be overshadowed by the clouds of war. His words immediately made the poor king think of the undead lord. This surprised Jinju, as he didn't expect the kings to be aware of the situation on the 9th floor. The undead lord, in order to research chimeras, had already harmed many groups from various floors, giving him a notorious reputation. So they agreed that once the situation on the 9th floor stabilized, he would send someone to assist the wild boar tribe in moving to the 9th floor. Therefore, he advised them to stay put and recover during this time, focusing on defense and not to rashly go out and provoke wars. Then, amid the Boar King's gratitude, he turned and left. Upon returning to the surface, he immediately went to the profiteer intending to sell gems. He confidently tossed out a bag of velvet gems, asking the profiteer to appraise them. As soon as they met, the profiteer vividly described the news that had been spreading wildly in the industry recently. A powerful abyssal beast had driven away Songzia and his group occupying the maze. Looking at the picture of this sauté meatball spaghetti, Jinju could never have dreamed that his transformed appearance would be depicted in such a way. He quickly brushed it off and changed the subject. Then the profiteer asked with interest if he had gained anything on the 7th floor, such as inheriting a maze or witnessing others become maze lords. Of course, he had gained something. In fact, he had witnessed the entire process of Len's she inheriting the maze. But these were secrets that he couldn't share with outsiders. So he pretended to be annoyed and warned the profiteer that inheriting a maze wasn't as simple as clicking on a random case. Seeing this, the profiteer lost interest in asking further questions. He took out a business card saying someone wanted to meet him. He planned to hand over all these trivial matters to Domi. After all, he couldn't always be in a maze watching. Little did he know that these two suggestions from Domi could only be operated by the maze owner. Jinjen, you took the card with confusion and saw it was from an organization called Maze Development. Surprisingly, it was actually affiliated with an official institution. He was immediately alarmed, wondering what he had done to attract official attention. He casually inquired about the other party's intentions. The profiteer didn't conceal anything. He said the person was introduced by NG Tai and they hoped to discuss a big project with him. However, they were unwilling to disclose the specifics of the project. They said it involved national secrets and preferred to discuss details in person. As he said this, Jin Genu's eyes suddenly changed, and the business card in his hand turned to ash. This scene surprised the profiteer who didn't expect such a reaction from Jin Genu. In response, Jin Genu simply stated that he was tired recently and had no plans to enter the maze for now. In reality, he still had a lot of things to deal with on his own. He had no time to get involved. After settling the payment for the gems with the profiteer, he turned and left. Meanwhile, Yellow Dragon was sitting idly on the throne of the carnival maze. However, little troublemaker Tia was stuck to the wall, probably to prevent him from continuing to wreck the place. Suddenly, a spatial rift appeared in the maze. Yellow Dragon quickly sat up straight in shock. The next second, Jin Yu's figure walked into the maze. He glanced at Tia, who was flailing about while stuck to the wall, and immediately warned Yellow Dragon that if he continued to babysit like this, he'd embed him in the wall as a torch. Frightened, Yellow Dragon immediately declared emphatically that he would never dare to do it again. At this moment, several rabbits walked out of the rooms in the carnival maze.